Welcome to Jayvil Stories. Before we continue with this story, please don't forget to hit the subscribe button. Turn on the notification bell to always get notified for upcoming stories. And also, share this story with loved ones and friends. Thank you very much. Elliot Vanderbilt's life was a spectacle of unimaginable wealth. His name adorned skyscrapers, his investments spanned continents, and his reputation as a financial savant preceded him in every room. Tall and broad-shouldered, with meticulously styled silver hair, he exuded confidence in his custom-tailored suits that cost more than the average person's yearly salary. His penthouse, perched atop Manhattan's skyline, was a palace of glass and gold, with chandeliers imported from Venice and a personal art collection worth millions. He was the epitome of success, untouchable in his empire of wealth and power, or so everyone believed. But behind the grandeur lay a man addicted to admiration and terrified of losing it. Elliot was deeply lonely, his relationships transactional, and his nights often spent staring out at the city lights with a glass of expensive whiskey in hand. His wealth brought him privilege, but not peace. Every deal was a new conquest, a validation of his superiority. Yet, unbeknownst to him, the foundation of his empire was built on arrogance, and the cracks were beginning to show. When a young tech entrepreneur approached Elliot with a proposal for a cutting-edge cryptocurrency, he saw an opportunity to cement his legacy. The entrepreneur, nervous but passionate, laid out a vision of decentralized finance, promising unprecedented returns. Skeptics warned Elliot of the risks, but he brushed them aside. To him, risks were for those who couldn't afford to fail. He invested billions without proper due diligence, convinced his mere association would turn the venture into gold. The deal was hailed as visionary in the media, further feeding Elliot's ego. He held press conferences, extolling the future of finance and his role in shaping it. But whispers of instability within the cryptocurrency company began surfacing. Elliot dismissed them as baseless rumors, failing to see that his new investment was a ticking time bomb. Just months after the deal, the cryptocurrency market took a sudden nosedive. Elliot's new venture became the centerpiece of the crash, losing millions daily. Investors grew restless, demanding answers, but Elliot's bravado only made matters worse. "It's a temporary setback," he assured his board, though doubt clouded his usually confident tone. Behind closed doors, he scrambled to stabilize the hemorrhaging funds, but the numbers didn't add up. The media, which once praised him as a financial genius, turned vicious. Headlines mocked him for his hubris, calling the investment Elliot's folly. Friends and allies began to distance themselves, their loyalty evaporating in the face of his impending ruin. For the first time in decades, Elliot felt the sting of vulnerability. The final blow came when a whistleblower revealed fraudulent activity within the cryptocurrency firm, directly implicating Elliot. Federal investigations were launched, and lawsuits flooded in from investors who had lost their life savings. Overnight, his empire crumbled. Banks froze his assets, his company's stock plummeted, and his board voted to oust him as CEO. Elliot's downfall was a public spectacle. Paparazzi swarmed him as he left his office for the last time, his face pale and gaunt. His once tailored suit hung loosely on his frame, a stark contrast to the man who had exuded power. The world watched as the mighty Elliot Vanderbilt was brought to his knees, his kingdom reduced to ashes. Elliot's possessions, symbols of his wealth and status, were auctioned off to pay his creditors. The grand piano from his penthouse, his fleet of luxury cars, even the cufflinks he once flaunted were sold to strangers. Crowds gathered to witness the spectacle, some out of curiosity, others reveling in his humiliation. Elliot attended the auction in disguise, standing in the shadows as strangers bid on pieces of his life. He clenched his fists, his pride battling the crushing reality of his downfall. When the auctioneer hammered down the final bid on his penthouse, Elliot turned and walked away, no longer the man he once was. Homeless and penniless, Elliot became a target of ridicule. Tabloids gleefully shared photos of him being evicted from his mansion, his belongings dumped onto the street like trash. Former friends and business partners avoided him, their loyalty evaporated. His phone, once buzzing with calls and messages, was now eerily silent. One day a journalist cornered him outside a shelter, shoving a microphone in his face. "Mr. Vanderbilt, any comment on your downfall?" Elliot stared at the camera, his face a mask of exhaustion. "No comment," he muttered, before shuffling away. The humiliation was unbearable, but worse was the realization that no one cared. That first night on the streets was a brutal awakening. The cold bit through Elliot's thin coat, a relic from his past life as he wandered aimlessly. Every street corner felt like a stage, and every passing stranger a judge. He found a bench in a dimly lit park and sat down, his mind racing with memories of his former life. He watched as people hurried past, their faces a blur of indifference. For the first time, Elliot understood what it meant to be invisible. The man who once commanded boardrooms now sat among the city's forgotten, a phantom of his former self. Days turned into weeks, and hunger became a constant companion. Elliot, who once dined on caviar and filet mignon, now rummaged through trash bins for scraps. The stench of decay was overwhelming, but desperation silenced his revulsion. He found half a sandwich in a garbage can outside a cafe and devoured it, tears streaming down his face. Interactions with other homeless people revealed a world he had ignored. They shared their stories, their pain and their survival tips. Elliot listened, humbled by their resilience. He realized that wealth had insulated him from humanity, and now, stripped of it, he was finally seeing the world as it was. One day, while begging outside a subway station, Elliot saw a familiar face. It was Richard, a former investor. Richard's eyes widened in recognition, then narrowed in contempt. "You ruined me, Vanderbilt," he spat, throwing a handful of coins at Elliot's feet. The coins clattered on the pavement, a harsh reminder of his disgrace. Elliot picked up the coins, his hands trembling. "I'm sorry," he whispered, but Richard was already gone. The encounter left him shaken, a reminder of the lives he had destroyed in his pursuit of power. The weight of his past mistakes felt unbearable. Elliot's darkest days stretched into weeks until he wandered into a warm, bustling soup kitchen run by a woman named Marie. Middle-aged, with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, she handed him a bowl of steaming soup and a piece of bread without a word. The warmth of the meal brought tears to Elliot's eyes. It had been weeks since someone treated him with even a shred of humanity. Marie, noticing his despair, asked him about his story. For the first time, he opened up, recounting his rise and fall. Marie listened without judgment. "Everyone falls," she said, "but the important part is getting back up." Her words stayed with him. That night, as he slept on the hard ground of an alley, Elliot resolved to do just that. The next morning he returned to the soup kitchen, not for food, but for advice. Sitting by the window of the soup kitchen, Elliot reflected on his life for hours. He replayed every decision, every act of arrogance, and every warning he had ignored. He realized he had always been surrounded by sycophants who fed his ego, and he had let it blind him. His pursuit of power had cost him more than money. It had cost him his humanity. For the first time, Elliot admitted his culpability. His downfall wasn't a tragedy caused by external forces, it was the natural consequence of his hubris. The realization was both freeing and crushing. He had no one to blame but himself, but this also meant he had the power to change. Elliot's newfound resolve was tested when he fell gravely ill. Cold, malnourished and exhausted, he collapsed on a street corner. Passers-by ignored him until an ambulance arrived, called by an anonymous Good Samaritan. In the hospital, doctors treated him for pneumonia and dehydration. He was discharged a few days later, weaker than ever and with nowhere to go. As he sat on a hospital bench in a paper-thin jacket, Elliot faced the reality of his situation. He had hit rock bottom. There was no more pride to salvage, no reputation to restore. If he was to survive, he would have to rebuild himself from nothing. Elliot's fortune took a turn when he stumbled into a small diner on the edge of town. The owner, a wiry man named Gus, saw through Elliot's disheveled appearance and guessed his situation. "You look like you could use a break," Gus said, handing him a plate of scrambled eggs. After hearing Elliot's story, Gus offered him a job washing dishes. Elliot hesitated, ashamed to accept such a lowly position, but hunger and desperation silenced his pride. "I'll take it," he said, his voice hoarse. That night, Elliot worked his first shift, scrubbing pots and wiping tables, his hands blistered but his spirit ignited. The diner became Elliot's refuge. The work was hard, the pay meager, but it gave him purpose. For the first time in his life, he earned every dollar through honest labor. His co-workers treated him as an equal, oblivious to his former status. They shared jokes during breaks and offered advice on surviving the streets. One night, after closing, Elliot sat alone, reflecting on how far he had come. He realized that, for all its challenges, this life had a simplicity and authenticity his old one lacked. Each dish he washed felt like a small act of redemption, scrubbing away the stains of his past. After weeks of saving, Elliot managed to rent a tiny room in a rundown boarding house. The walls were thin, the mattress lumpy, but to him it was a palace. For the first time in months, he had a place to call his own. He bought a second-hand alarm clock and a small lamp, taking pride in every detail. That night, as he lay on his bed, he felt an unfamiliar sense of accomplishment. He had built this life with his own hands, not inherited it or manipulated it into existence. It wasn't much, but it was his, and that made all the difference. While delivering a takeout order one afternoon, Elliot ran into Jonathan Hart, a former business rival. Jonathan barely recognized him, but burst into laughter when he did. "Vanderbilt, washing dishes? How the mighty have fallen," he sneered. Elliot felt the sting of humiliation, but didn't react. "Yes," he said simply, "I've fallen, but I'm learning how to stand." His calmness disarmed Jonathan, who walked away muttering insults. Elliot, however, felt a surge of quiet pride. For the first time he realized that his worth wasn't tied to others' opinions or his wealth. He was finally free of the need to impress. Elliot's gratitude for the kindness shown to him led him to volunteer at Marie's soup kitchen. He spent his evenings serving meals and listening to the stories of others who had fallen on hard times. The experience was humbling and transformative. For the first time, Elliot found joy in giving without expecting anything in return. His presence at the soup kitchen became a source of hope for others. Though he rarely shared his story, those who learned it were inspired by his journey. Elliot realized that his greatest contribution wasn't in money or power, but in the lessons his fall had taught him. One evening, while working at the soup kitchen, Elliot met Olivia, a former employee who had idolized him. Shocked by his transformation, she listened as he recounted his fall and his efforts to rebuild. Moved by his honesty, Olivia offered him an opportunity to mentor a struggling startup she was part of. Elliot hesitated. His past mistakes weighed heavily on him, and he feared leading others astray. But Olivia's faith in him rekindled a spark of confidence. "I'll try," he said, and for the first time in years, he felt a sense of purpose beyond survival. Elliot threw himself into the mentorship role, guiding the startup with the wisdom he had gained through his failures. He taught the young entrepreneurs the importance of integrity, humility, and resilience. The company began to flourish, not because of his wealth, but because of his hard-earned experience. Though he would never return to billionaire status, Elliot found a deeper satisfaction in helping others succeed. He no longer sought power or recognition. His only goal was to leave the world better than he found it. In doing so, he discovered a version of himself he could finally respect. Years later, Elliot lived a modest but fulfilling life. His small apartment was filled with books, mementos from the diner, and letters of gratitude from those he had helped. One crisp autumn morning, he walked through the park where he had once slept as a homeless man. The bench where he had hit rock bottom now served as a reminder of how far he had come. As he sat, a young man approached, struggling with his own ambitions and failures. Elliot listened patiently, offering advice drawn from his own journey. As the man walked away, hopeful, Elliot leaned back and smiled. He was no longer defined by wealth or status, but by the lives he had touched. His fall from grace had become a testament to the power of redemption.